the University of Pittsburgh. And she's the founder and director of the Center for Analytical Approaches to Social Innovation. She has a PhD in social sciences from Caltech, and as an experimental economist, her work bridges academic research and the day-to-day challenges faced by those who provide services to vulnerable populations. She has multiple interdisciplinary collaborations with political science, social work, computer science, as well as experiments in many countries around the world. And we also have Itai Ashlagi from Stanford. He is joining us as a guest. So just as a reminder, everyone, feel free to ask questions, unmute yourselves, and so on. So Sera, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much. So thank you for being here, and thank you to Yash, Daniela, Gagan, and Judy for being organizers. So I'm Sera Linardi, and this is joint work with Colin Kemmer. And basically what we're looking at is the relationship between worker and firms in a market where there's a lot of shutdowns. And this is going to be an experiment. Okay, so in recent times, there's been a lot of exogenous labor demand shock. The restaurant industry is a good example of this. So the shocks could come in the form of government restrictions, 25% occupancy, so you don't get your hours, or firm-specific health shocks, like a COVID positive patient comes to your restaurant, and then now you have to shut down. After you shut down, then they're like, okay, now things are okay, then you reopen. And then sometimes you're even closed right after reopening, right? You go to work for a week and after that, we're shut down again. So is all of this bad for market efficiency? That's kind of the question that we're asking. In useful employment relations, there's a lot of implicit detail. So for example, you can say that, you should treat your customers well, but like you don't necessarily can say how a server should work with a customer. And so these kind of contracts could be inefficient because of moral hazard. So experiments have shown that you can actually achieve high efficiency with what is called relational contracts, which is even though people don't have formal guarantee that they will have future continuation, you can build and form a long-term relationship where there's a lot of reciprocity. So let's say there is a firm and then the firm offer workers high wages. The worker then puts in high effort and then the firm will repay that by giving the worker more hours or renewing their contract. So this is the situation with reciprocity. And usually for example, in the Brown, Falk, and Fehr situation, they found that this high tier market coexists with that low tier market that we talked about, where there's moral hazard, the firm offer, the workers put in low effort, and so the firms also give low wage offers. So what happens to this high tier market when firms can no longer guarantee that you will be reemployed in the next period, even if you work hard? So you can't guarantee higher hours. So maybe the workers will say, hey, it's not worthwhile to put in higher effort. And so the firm says, knowing that the worker is not going to put high effort, I'm just going to give low wages, right? So it'll fall apart. Okay. What does the literature say could happen? So, one, the market falls apart. Instead of having this repeated game, you have this exogenous random rematching with strangers. And then studies on recession, although I'll show you later that we don't exactly study recessions, there's a lot of similarities. They hurt both the good matches and the bad matches. So, the market does worse. And there's also studies that say that the market does not fall apart. So firms that know that there will be shocks in the future provide insurance so that the workers are insured through the shocks. Lazare study of the 2008 recession shows that market efficiency, like productivity, was high because anxious workers work harder. They were like doing more with less. That's the way they put it. And then another one could be a restart effect. Like maybe you have pairings that are not doing very well, but like once you have this stochastic interruption, you can start new and then you go back up to the high effort wage equilibrium, which is some of the things that they've seen in public goods game. Okay.
A quick question / comment. I noticed that the citations on your previous slide, the top half of the slide had older citations where things fall apart, and then the bottom half had newer citations. So maybe it's like better information or something.
Oh, okay. Good point. I mean, the Andreoni one has both the restart and the partner stranger matching thing. So I could put that older citation also down there. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Yash.
No, I just meant that maybe like with better information sharing with the internet and whatnot, maybe the shocks affect markets less.
Maybe with better information sharing, shocks affect markets less. In the sense of like this shocks that we're going to look at.
Can you show the previous slide?
Uh-huh.
I was asking what drives what
Like maybe markets are not falling apart in the last decade and a half, but they used to fall apart when there was a shock.
Maybe markets does not. Oh, you're looking at the citation and you're thinking that I'm taking like, so I think I can find more if I should do this literature review better so that I balances out the dates, but I think I can find, you know, some on each side of things.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, very good point. I did not notice that. Thank you. Okay. So what were we trying to do here? We're trying to show that you can have a perfect Bayesian equilibrium where you do have exogenous firm worker matching. So you have this destabilization of matches, but the market doesn't fall apart. And then we're going to show you in an experiment that has shutdowns. So firms are going to be shut down and not be able to contract. And we find that the market efficiency is maintained even though there's very frequent disruption. We'll show that this is driven by like what happens when workers are laid off, which is like what the physical event of the shutdown itself produces. And we show something that wasn't predicted by our model, which is the weakest workers are hurt. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the model and the experimental design together in order to save time. So the model is a standard gift exchange labor market model. And then I'll show the Brown, Falk, and Fehr no disruption baseline. And I'll also show you screenshots from our experiment. So the prediction there is that firm worker matches will happen early and they'll persist. And then I'll talk about how we model stochastic disruptions. So our prediction is that during a shutdown, another firm might come in and like poach your worker. And so the matches will form throughout, and then their matches that are formed early may dissolve. Okay. For the experimental results, I'll first show you the overall market performance, and then I'll show you what happens to laid off worker during the shutdown. So I'll like focus on the shutdown periods. And I look at when the people are recruited and what kind of contracts do they engage in, like once they're working during a shutdown. Okay, any questions?
So Sera, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is the shutdown, it's not a firm decision? It is a firm decision, right?
No, it's an exogenous shutdown. It's like,
so then if this happens, how can another firm poach the worker?
Because the workers will be available in the market. Like you'll see someone who wasn't normally available is now available.
But you shut down also yourself, right?
No, it's not a correlated shock. So each firm is experiencing IID shock. So I could be shut down and then my neighbor could be open and available to recruit my worker.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Mohammed. Okay. So here's the model of the standard gift exchange labor market experiment. So there is fewer firms than workers, and one firm can only work with one worker can only work with one firm per period. And the firm offer contracts that, between 0 and 100, and this is like directly the experimental setup. And then they can request effort between 1 and 10, 10 being the highest, and they can offer it to a specific person or publicly. The wages will be contractable while the effort won't be. So if a worker accepts a contract, they deliver an effort level E. So here's kind of what the setting looks like. So you see your period, you see if you're a firm, you see your own ID, and then you see which workers are still available in the market. So this kind of answers Mohammed's question of like, how do I know when someone's available? I'll relate that later to the shutdown. And then firm makes the offer. It could be public and seen by everyone, or it could be private and just seen by a specific ID. And then I can specify wage and requested effort. So when someone accepts my offer, then I would have to prepay the worker. Okay, so there are the public offers and the private offers will be listed there. So a worker sees the following screen. They see their ID, they see their period, and then they see all the public offers. So public offers are indiscriminate, and then they see all the private offers that's directed only to her. Once they see an offer and they click on it, then they choose an effort level. So it's between 1 and 10, and then it's not binding at all what the firm requested. And then the cost will be increasing in effort. So there is the effort cost schedule. And once the firm and the worker contracted, then you get the payoff. And so the firm will just get 10 times the effort minus the wages that paid. And then the worker gets the wages minus the cost of effort. And if nobody accepts the contract, the firm gets 0 and the worker gets an unemployment of 5. So they see this screen, they see their IDs of the contracting partner, and then they see the income of the worker and the firm. Okay, so that's the setup for the baseline, no labor demand shock setting. Okay, any question about the setup?
So what do workers know? What do firms know about workers that are unemployed? Do they know anything about their past performance or anything like that?
I mean, what they can do is they can be, I mean, there's only 10 workers, so they can observe how often they've been employed, whether they were employed in the last period. They could, later in the shutdown one, I could show you a little bit more because you also see which firms are shut down. But that's all. They don't know at what level they work. They don't know what the effort level. Okay.
But the firm that contracted with the worker knows the effort level, right?
Yeah. The firm that contracted knows this. Okay. All right. So, what does workers? How does workers navigate this market? So the workers think about the cumulative payoff of not shirking, and then the workers also think about what happens when they shirk, and then they'll shirk if the effort that's requested in this period is more costly than the difference in this cumulative future payoff. So we all know that at the last period, the worker will shirk. So wages is the lowest. And because wages is basically the highest wages that could be offered by a firm, just equal to unemployment, there's no value in the last period. And so in the period before last, they'll also shirk, etc. So this is like the low effort, low wage equilibrium, right? So public firms don't care who they contract with because everyone is shirking, and then they'll put in low wage offer and worker puts in low effort. Okay. So let's add some social preferences to this, and let's suppose that some fraction of the worker is fair. What that means is that if the firm offers equal surplus sharing, so that's W hat is the wage that results in equal surplus sharing, and there is that schedule there with the W hat, then the utility of the fair worker is just the material monetary payoff if the wages is below this threshold. But if the wages is above that threshold, they have this extra term where they feel bad if they don't perform what is requested. Okay, so let's just assume that this is high enough so that the workers will perform requested effort if offered a fair wage. Then at the last period, the firm has some probability of actually getting what they want. And so if the fraction of fair worker is high enough, then the firm will pay for non-minimum effort in the last period. And then the selfish type now has some reason to not shirk at T-1. And then you can kind of build up a higher effort level that way. Okay, so for our effort wage schedule, the minimum fraction of fair types has to be 55%. And then what you could get is you could get last period effort of 2. And then from that, you can get second to last period effort of 4. And then that continuously build up the cumulative value of future periods so that you can get to the high maximum effort 10 equilibrium on earlier periods. Okay. So what we have is now we can show that the following strategies will be a PBE if there is no disruptions. So let's assume that if someone shirks, the firm considers them selfish. And so if you're selfish, I will either not hire you or I will hire you and give you the worst wage offer. And then all else equals, there's a status quo bias. Both sides will prefer to contract with an incumbent. Okay, so firms will send public offers with the highest wages. Some workers will accept and deliver the highest effort. And then the firm just continuously renew this offer with non-shirking incumbents following that constraint. And then there will be no shirking before the last period. At the last period, some people, the selfish workers shirk, and then the fair workers provide effort too. And some proportion of worker remains unemployed throughout, right? So in this one, you'll have firm worker pairs formed at the early period, and they basically just persist. And then the contracting will happen mostly between incumbents. Okay. So this is like the non-shutdown one. So from here, I'm now going to add a stochastic disruption and talk about the shutdown that we implemented. Okay, so what happens when there are shutdowns? So with probability delta, a firm is hit by a shutdown. So this shutdown is firm period specific, right? So it's like someone that's infected goes to your restaurant and now you have to shut down, and the people in the restaurant next to you is not hit. So again, like when Colin and I worked on this, we never ever thought that something like COVID will happen. We were thinking much more about maybe like high tech firms or like industry with high failure rate, where you might go to work and then you find out that you didn't get your next round of funding, and then your job is gone, or at least you're like on furlough for some period. But this was done in we finished this in early 2019, and we started way before that. So it wasn't, we just never thought that such kinds of shutdown will ever happen, and as what's happening with COVID. Okay, so
do you have any surge costs in the model now, especially
no,
now that you're gonna put these shocks?
No, there's no surge cost. You mean like for firms to look for openings or workers to look for?
Yeah.
No, there's no surge cost here. Yeah. Okay, so with some probability delta, the firm can't contract for K periods. So they can't contract with any workers. They're literally shut down. And we call the incumbent worker laid off. The shutdowns are public knowledge. So here you see the same screen. The only thing that's added now is we have these boxes for the firms. And so you can see the identity of the firms that are forced to shut down, right? So this is like the newspaper article that you saw earlier. It says like this restaurant is shut down, that restaurant is shut down. So here you can now see, you've always been able to track the workers that are available. But here, because there's only a small number of workers, I mean, this won't work with 1,000 workers. But here, I could see if worker one, which has previously maybe always been gone because they had an employer that they were constantly contracting with, then worker one is suddenly available. So even though I don't see the pairings, I would be able to notice when firms are shut down and certain workers appear, right? So even though I don't see it explicitly, I would be able to infer it. Okay. So the workers themselves also see the identity of the firms that are forced to shut down.
Sarah, I have a question on the previous slide. So imagine that only one firm shuts down.
Yeah.
But then there might be two available workers because the other firm decided to lay off the worker because he didn't put any effort. Yes. Can I distinguish both workers, or I don't know which one is?
No, you can't tell. Yeah. So there's definitely some noise there. Yes. Okay. So all right. So this is the worker side. Okay. So the worker is able to see which firms are shut down. Okay. So now let's think about how the matching will change given the shutdown. Okay. So at period T now, the firm can be in one of four states. And I'm just going to give a one period shutdown example just because it's simple. So a firm at period T can be entering the market for the first time, right? So imagine a firm that wants to open, but then shocks happen and they can't open their restaurant until T periods later, right? So they're hit T-1 times, and then they finally manage to enter the market at period T. Another one is a firm that is available to renew an offer with an existing incumbent. So this is a continuous one. They were not shut down the last period, and they're not shut down now. And then another one is a firm that is right now shut down. And so now he's just laid off a worker. And so now this worker is available because he does not have an incumbent. but this is not due to his own performance, right? So this is a worker that no longer has, like we talked about the status quo bias, and this worker here does not have an incumbent, but is not labeled as a shirker. So other firms will consider this worker a potential hire. And there's a possibility of firms returning. And so this is just 1 minus all the three other states. And here the firm can reconnect with the worker if the worker is available, meaning if the worker has not been hired by someone else and now consider someone else their incumbent, then this firm is available to reconnect with the worker. Okay. So continuing this 1 period examples, okay, let's just, I'm just gonna use the term available worker to describe workers with no incumbent firm, which is laid off worker or worker that never employed. And I'm gonna let RT be the probability that available worker gets a new private offer at period T. So this is a chance to start a relationship with a new firm. Okay, so looking at this, the top part is just the number of firms that need a new worker. And the bottom part is the number of available workers. So you take this apart, then the number of firms that need a new worker are the ones that are entering. And the firms that are returning, but the workers have been poached. And so now they need to go and hire someone else. And then in the bottom part, the number of workers with no incumbent is just W minus the number of firms that is making offer to incumbent workers. And part of it is those who are available to renew, and also firms who reconnect because their incumbent worker has not been poached. Okay, so this is the probability that a worker can start a new relationship with another firm at non-first periods. So now the selfish worker, when he's thinking whether or not he should shirk, is comparing the future payoff of not shirking, which is if I don't shirk, I can be rehired by my incumbent with probably 1 minus delta, or I could be laid off and I could be hired by someone else, or I could be laid off and not hired by someone else, but rehired upon return. Someone who's thinking about shirking thinks that if their incumbent is not shut down, they'll be found out, they'll be fired. If they're shut down, they cover their tracks, and so they could be laid off and hired by someone else, or they could be laid off and not hired by someone else, right? So now the future period, the value of the future period is kind of slightly discounted because of these differences. Okay, so if this was the effort schedule that was possible with no shutdown, with a shutdown of 0.1, it just changes very little. And then you could see here with probability of shutdown of 0.3 and of 0.5. So 0.5 here is like at every period, there's a 50% chance that you would be shut down for 3 periods. Then you see that it starts to unravel from the end. But the earlier periods is untouched, right? The cumulative value of period T minus 4 to period T is high enough to give us still effort level 10 on early periods. Okay. So then we can now talk about the PBE when we have disruption probability delta. So all available firms in the first period send public offers. This is the same as what we saw before. And then firms renew with non-shirking incumbents, and we just kind of adjust the what is possible in terms of the effort level with this delta. And now the firm can have an incumbent that's unavailable, right? Because we talked about this RT. If the firm's incumbent is available, offer the same contract to available worker. And on the worker side, there will be no shirking before the last period. And workers that are laid off will receive the same contract with a new firm with probability RT. And everything else is as before. And so what we're going to have here is we're going to have new firm worker pair forming in later periods with probability RT, and also earlier relationships being terminated. Okay, so just to summarize the prediction, we have frequent shutdowns that destabilize the relationship, but they don't harm market efficiency beyond the unraveling in the last few periods. And why is this? It destabilizes relationship because new firm worker matches are forming during the shutdowns. And it doesn't harm market efficiency because the laid-off worker are receiving high-wage contract because the firm actually wants to have a relationship with them as opposed to treating them as shirkers. and they don't shirk because they do want to continue working with this firm. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. So I'm going to go into the experiment itself so we can get to the data. So we ran this with 9 firms and 10 workers per market, and they have fixed ID, as you saw earlier. The shutdown duration is 3 periods, and we ran 3 treatments, one with no shutdown, one where every firm has a 10% chance of being shut down at every period, and one where every firm has a chance, 50% chance of being shut down every period. So this is like very severe shutdowns. Right? We ran 5 sessions per treatment, so that's a total of 285 firms and workers. There's 15 sessions. And then what I'm going to show you later is basically the session means first, and then I'll go into the regression. So we do this like what you're going to see later for the session means like the very conservative comparison. And we use the original Z-tree code from the Brown, Falk, and Fehr original paper. And we just extended it for 30 periods, and then we implemented the shutdown in that. So you'll see like the screenshot that you saw earlier is like, you know, the old Z-tree screenshots. We ran the pilot like a long time ago at Caltech and UCLA, and then the experiment itself was run at Pitt just 2018, 2019 at the Peel Lab. Okay. So just like some summary stats about the markets before we jump into comparing this to the predictions. So
can you just remind again that what are they gonna they see in the experiments when we hire it? If you can remind us. You talked about what you see.
You meaning like what does the worker see?
What does the employer see? And
so
yeah.
So the employer sees the list of all available workers. The employer sees the public offers that is offered by other firms. The employers see which other firms are shut down. And then once someone accepts their offer, they see the effort level that is put in, and then they see their earnings and they see their workers' earnings.
But do they see anything about the history of the worker?
They do not see the history of the worker.
Okay.
One more related clarification question. So what is a public offer?
A public offer is an offer that you send to all workers. So it's an indiscriminate offer. So if you don't think that the workers are different, then you should just be sending public offers.
So the first grabs it?
Yes, exactly. The first person grabs it. Yeah.
Like Uber.
Like what?
Like ride sharing.
Okay. So earlier we talked about the proportion of the Fehr types. So if I look up the proportion of the Fehr types in the no shutdown treatment, I see that 50% of the workers that contract in the last period don't shirk. So this is not 55%, but it's kind of, you know, it's not too far off. And how harsh did the downturns hit these various markets? So there's no shutdown periods in the no shutdown treatment. 13.5% of the periods in the infrequent shutdown treatment experience a shutdown, and this is 56% in the frequent shutdown treatment. So it was very, very severe in the frequent shutdown treatment. Workers were working about 90% of possible contracting periods in all of them. So you could imagine that, like, because of this very frequent shutdown, sometimes even when they can contract, people might not do anything because they're just confused and tired. But what we see is in all of them, employment is about 90%. Okay. The average wage was 38 and the average requested effort was 7.7. So this is not a fair, this is not a W hat, right? This is not a fair work wage effort sharing. But the effort that the employees put in is 6.4. That effort makes the surplus sharing about fair. Okay, and the average market efficiency, which is just a function of effort minus cost, is about 66%. Right, so this is just summary stats for the whole market. Okay, so now I'm going to go into testing the theoretical predictions. So first looking at the aggregate effects. Does it destabilize relationship? And does it harm market efficiency beyond the last few periods? So this is who people are contracting with in the no shutdown treatment. So 61% of contracts in no shutdown is with an incumbent employer, and 17% is with a completely new firm. There are things that we don't predict, such as a worker who has been disconnected with a previous employer going back to work for them. So that's 22%. But where we're going to see action is in the incumbent, the proportion of work with incumbent and the proportion of work with new firms. So here you see that with frequent shutdowns, people contract less with an incumbent employer and a lot more with completely new firms. However, it doesn't affect market efficiency. So the wages that are offered by the firm is pretty much, there's no significant difference throughout. The effort requested by the firm aren't that different. And then the effort that is delivered by the workers are also not different. And if I show you the time series of the effort, you see that they're all pretty similar. With the small line is the no shutdown treatment, and the two thick lines are the one with shutdown. And you could see that the effort builds up through the periods, and then there's like the end of game effect. And if I run a regression on this, let me just show you first who they contract with. We see that workers are 14% more likely to contract with, they're 13% less likely to contract with incumbent employer in the high frequency shutdown, and 21% more likely to work with new firms. But the effort delivered is not different, and the wages offered is not different. They're only different at the last 5 periods. So in the last 5 periods, we do see that the effort delivered is less with the frequent shutdown, but it is not for the wages, which shows that the firm does not anticipate this earlier unraveling due to the shutdown. Okay, all right. So I've shown you that matches are less likely to last, and new matches are more likely to form in this market, but it doesn't harm the efficiency beyond the last few periods. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into the layoff, like what happens to laid off workers itself. Okay. So first thing I'm going to look at is, do laid off worker get hired? Okay. So here, the first thing here
Sera,
is.
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So when a worker is available, how can I tell that the worker is available because the firm got shut down, or because they were fired, or because they think that the firm is not offering them a fair wage?
So this is like Daniela's question. I can't tell. What I can tell indirectly in some ways by looking at, like, if I've looked at the screen for like several periods of time, I might be able to tell. So imagine this. Imagine you see that firm worker 1 is always disappearing. It always disappears really fast, right? So worker 1 is contracting with someone, never available. And then at like period 10, firm 2 got shut down, and then worker 1 is available the whole time. I can infer, I may not be right, but I can infer that worker 1 was working with firm 2 and then is left because of a shutdown. Again, it's imperfect, like Daniel was saying, if there was 2 firms, and then I can't really tell which is which.
So in the theory model, is this learning happening?
No, the theory model has no learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
A
The theory
related
model is
question.
very simple. Yeah.
A related question is, what kind of communication do these people have with each other? Like, can I type messages?
No.
How do they even offer a wage to people? How does any of this communication happen with the offering, and I decide to continue to work, or can workers quit?
Let me show you. Should I should probably jump into the earlier screen. Let me go back to the earlier screen and show you this. have to hit share screen. Okay, can you see the screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so this is how they communicate. So you could see which workers are available, and then the only way you communicate is that you can send public offers, which is you offer a wage and requested effort to all workers, and the first worker that jumps on it gets it. Or you can make a private offer, which is you have you specify which specific worker you want to work with, and then you offer them a wage and a requested effort, and then only that worker will be able to see it.
Okay, got it. Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. And then when the worker selects it, like this is where the worker will see it, they'll click on one of it, and then they'll select an effort level. And then that's what the firm will see as the effort.
Great.
Okay. So now I have to try to move back into that screen. Okay. I wish there was like a one-click way to do this. Okay, can you guys see it? Yes? Okay. So okay, so during a shutdown, so this is looking at the worker period. So what this is showing is that when a worker's incumbent employer is shut down, the worker is 3% more likely to receive a new private offer. This is per period, right? So the employer is shut down for 3 periods, and so this kind of adds up. The probability, the baseline probability that any worker at any period receive a private offer from another firm, so this is just being recruited out of the blue, is about 9%, right? So a 3% increase is significant. Okay, one question that you might have is like, well, maybe I just see that a lot of firms are being shut down, and I say, hey, there's a whole bunch of workers, so I'm just gonna I just want to hire, right? Because there's a whole bunch of free workers now. Well, this regression is on public offers. And what we see here is that public offers do not become more available when employers are shut down. So this is not just indiscriminate, like people sending indiscriminate public offers to everyone. This is people sending it to maybe workers that they've been trying to hire, but is working for someone else. The workers are more indiscriminate though. Previously, a worker is less likely to accept public offer than a private offer, because you would like to be personally recruited rather than respond to like some general offer. But when they're shut down, when they're laid off, they're more desperate and they're more likely to accept a public offer. So a combination of being recruited and more likely to accept any offer, public offer, results in workers being more likely to contract with a completely new firm, 20% more likely during the shutdown periods. Okay, so this relationship are happening. What happens to the employer when they return? So when they return, for every contract that the worker works on during the shutdown, so think of it as like, a restaurant was shut down for 2 months, and the worker works with someone else for the entire 2 months, right? So for the longer the worker works with other people, the less likely the firm is to return and try to rehire this worker when they can operate again. So the firm, lets them go here. Okay. So this last thing that I'm going to show you is that the workers are receiving high wage contracts and are not shirking. And so the kind of contracts that they're engaged in during this shutdown is grounds for future relational contract. So when I'm just regressing the wage that a worker gets from the incumbent with the binary variable that show that the employer is shut down, I get a negative effect, right? I get a negative coefficient. But when I control for the fact that this firm is not the worker's incumbent, this goes away. What I learned here is that a firm is more likely to give an incumbent worker extra money. Like there's an incumbent worker bonus that by definition doesn't exist when you're contracting with someone new. So once controlling for that, the laid-off worker is getting just as good of a contract as non-laid-off worker. What about the effort that is delivered by the worker? So first I get this negative coefficient here, but once I control for the fact that the wages that are offered is lower, I no longer get that negative coefficient. And then once I control for the identity of the firm, I learned that workers are the same. Workers like incumbent. So when a worker is working with an incumbent firm, they put in one unit of extra effort. And by definition, during their layoff, they're not working with an incumbent firm. Once I control for that, I see that laid-off workers are working harder than non-laid-off worker, and because they're anxious and they want to start a new relationship with a firm. Okay. So here's some pictures of like what this looks like in terms of the contracting patterns from the worker side. So here's one worker, and the x-axis is the period, and the y-axis is whether an employer is their primary employer, secondary, or tertiary. The numbers are the ID numbers of the firms. So you see this worker, he kind of like experiment a little bit in the beginning, and then after that he settles with firm 1901 and just kind of works with firm 1901 the whole time. The size of the circle indicates the effort level that's put in, right? So with 1909, he's just sort of like, not putting in high effort at all. And this is very similar all throughout. So basically you get a bit of experimentation in the beginning and you just settle with one firm for the rest of your career if there is no shutdown. Okay, what about infrequent shutdown? So when you have infrequent shutdown, essentially everything is the same as no shutdown. So you experiment a little bit and then you work with one firm. So here the workers work with firm 1707. And then 1707 is shut down. Okay. So the red dots shows what the worker did at the first period after being laid off, the first contract. So the worker takes this like low effort, low wage contract with 1701 and 1706. And contracts that doesn't result in much because he's pretty sure that he's going to come back to 1707. Then he just works with 1707 again. And at the last period, you see that tiny circle is shirked, right? So not much change, except that during the periods of shutdown, you go temp to someone else. Okay, but relational contracts basically remain the same.
How does he know that he's going to go back?
The what?
Why is he assuming he's going to go back?
Why are they rehired in this one?
So he knows he's going to go back to the same firm?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about like the I mean, I don't have it in the model,
it's
right?
An assumption.
But yeah, but like if we look at it, we see that people who have longer periods of uninterrupted contracting are more likely to just sort of take this temp jobs, take this other contracts during shutdown and not perform very high. But we don't have it.
But there's assumption here that if they come back, they will be able to be hired.
Yes. So it seems like something that's not in the model is that the workers do think about how long they've contracted continuously with their primary firm, and that gives them security that they'll be rehired. But we don't have that in the model. Okay. So you see that also with with other workers. So you see a lot of one person working for one place and then just kind of temping during the shutdowns. So that was infrequent shutdown. So what happens when shutdowns are frequent? When shutdowns are frequent, then the relational contracts are really quite different. So here's a worker that starts working for firm 3403. And then at second time they work for him, there's a shutdown, and then he starts working for firm 3404. And then unlike what we've predicted by the model, the firm 3403 rehired this worker, right? That's the diamond shape, green diamond shape thing. And then this worker just basically is juggling these two firms all throughout and sometimes go to the third firm. And slowly in time, he started becoming more attached to this firm that he contracted with second, 3404. And then he starts shirking on 3403, like slowly in time. So it's not clear that the first the first firm that you work with is going to be your primary firm. and workers are juggling a lot more relationships at the same time. So this is similar with other workers here. Like some workers are working with 7 partners, some workers are working with 5 partners, and basically the top 20% workers are juggling like 3 relationships at a time. Okay, so this is like really hard to do. And what we see is that workers that are the top workers do well and the bottom workers do worse. So if we look at the welfare distribution of the no shutdown treatment, we see that workers take home 56% of the surplus. If we look within workers, we see that the top 20% of workers get to 46% of the total worker surplus, and the top 20% firm takes 38% of the firm surplus. But with shutdown, the worker share of the total surplus decreases from 56% to 47%, and the top 20% workers get more out of the total worker surplus. So it goes from 43% to 55%. The within firm inequality doesn't change. So it was 38% and it stayed at 38%. Okay. Anecdotally, like we also see that there was a lot of kind of like distress, like within the subjects in this frequent shutdown treatment. Like when they're shut down, they're like, oh, you can hear like audible groan of people. In summary, what we see is that even in this very difficult situation, which is this very frequent shutdown, you can still maintain market efficiency. The workers and the firm adapt their contracting style. So to instead of having one single relationship, they have multiple relationships. And what's really obvious for the worker is that they, instead of being employers, they kind of act more like freelancer, and they're balancing multiple employers. And studies of recession, like again, our study is not one of recession because we don't have correlated shocks. But studies of recession have seen that the workers, in particular, the weakest one, are harmed by these disruptions. And so workers are doing more with less. And that's also what we're seeing here. In the future, I think what we're interested in doing is we want to study, like we saw the workers being in distress with this with this stochastic disruption. So we would like to maybe look more into emotions and think about like policies on how to alleviate workers' anxiety in such a working environment. But you know, we haven't thought much about that, so that's like far in the future. Okay, so that is all. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Sera.
Thank you.
Any questions from?
So another question about the setup. What do the workers know about the shutdowns? Do they know when they go in that there's going to be frequent shutdown, or it's a surprise after they start playing?
It's a surprise. We don't tell them about the treatment when we recruit them.
Okay, thanks. But they so they don't know anything, like when they start playing the game, that's when they knew a shutdown was a possibility. They don't know shutdowns typically last for 3 days.
Those things they do. So so when we recruit them, we don't tell them that they're playing a game about shutdown. Once they come into the lab, we explain all the rules very clearly to them. So they do know that there's a 50% chance of a shutdown. And they do know that a shutdown is going to last for 3 periods. And they do know that the shutdown is exogenous, and they would be able to see which firm is shut down.
I see, makes sense.
So this is like if these shutdowns are going to be more and more often, we will expect them. We might see more platforms emerging to help for searching and for hiring and so forth. And then lots of issues come up with what to do. One concern is they're maybe going to create inequality even between low-skilled workers, because some people have been working and some people not. And then the question is what information to show about those workers that maybe haven't been employed for a while, or and so that will be a real challenge if such platforms emerge, what to design about ratings and information about them. So yeah, and search cost is definitely a big deal, I think. I imagine for both sides in this case.
Right.
That someone is laid off, or you're going to find. I don't want to. I would encourage everyone to come next week to Peng's talk, who's going to actually talk exactly about this. When we we have two-sided markets, which markets are hard to find matches and when are easier to find matches, and it depends a lot on the distribution of the qualities in the match. So that Peng will talk about a nice theoretical model next week. Yeah, and then I guess also public information where you work might play a role. I know I can imagine that if I'm laid off from my job and there's information, what is this job that I'm laid off, and people can learn if it's going to be temporary or not, and then might be worried to hire me if they think I'm going to go back to that job. So how to indicate that I'm really available or I'm thinking to go back. I don't know how to deal with this, but that will play a role, I think. I know Google hired a lot of workers from Facebook or Google hired a lot of workers from Airbnb now, and I don't know if I can't imagine they're going to go back quickly, but yeah, it's interesting to know if we can understand what is temporary, what is not. Yeah. But all these things are going to affect matching. And I think already now low skill levels are having very tough time to find jobs, not because there's no good platforms for this. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if someone wants that.
So I think it's really interesting to, like right now they don't have the information about the worker, right? But in the model, we just assume that once a worker is shirk, they're like marked forever because people have like perfect memory. But like in here, I think there is like, we see that people have like a short memory of the histories. And I do agree with you that like it will increase if we have platforms and they have a lot of information, it will increase inequality because the workers that are good will be hired away very quickly, and the workers that are bad will kind of suffer.
Yeah, so it depends. So we don't use much the ratings of drivers. It's good mostly for internal for Uber when we decide if to accept a driver or not. So it's a lot of the design of the platform, what to show and what not to show, I think, in order to make sure that this inequality. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what actually happens today with how do low workers search so much. I know there's some websites that I'm familiar with, but yeah, I don't know exactly how this is happening.
Very interesting experiment, Sera, and intriguing results.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that you're also doing some surveys or some sort of conversations or data collection in the real world or in the field, and especially in the current context. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah. So we got a grant with the law school and the business school at first it was to study restaurant workers and like their it was about harassment. It was something that the law school was interested in. But when we started working on the survey, then the COVID thing happened. And so what we were hearing from our initial interviews, like kind of pilot interviews, was like workers' expectation of like being rehired. Like if I am laid off right now, if I'm furloughed, like should I start looking for a job right now, or should I kind of wait for my employer to come back? How likely is my employer going to come back and hire me? There's also questions about like so there was also, it's more complicated in the real world because there was also that unemployment benefit that then they're like, well, I'm making more if I stay out of the market than when I'm not, which is, I think it's a good thing to, it's a good reason to have lab experiments where you can control this sort of things. But some of the questions that this lab experiment has inspired us to ask the worker is basically on kind of measuring their work environment before COVID and the intensity at which they search for jobs and are employed during COVID with their likelihood of being rehired maybe not by the specific restaurant, but by the owners of the restaurant if they were to open something else post-COVID. And we plan to go back to them post-COVID and to see whether or not their predictions were correct. I am also like, after Itai's comments, I'm also like really interested in like asking them about their search cost, right? Like how difficult it is for you to look for other jobs. Did they come to you? Like what we saw with like people recruiting, I can see that for, you know, like in Pittsburgh, the neighborhoods are really small. And so you can tell when one person's closed down and then you know who works there. And so it's possible for people to recruit directly. But at a larger scale, it's hard. So I'm interested in asking them about their search costs, about whether they were recruited or they went out and looked for public postings. And also, I'm interested in asking firms, right? Like, how do you invest in workers knowing that they might go back to their previous employers? Like, how do you treat workers that are kind of functioning as freelancer? I mean,
Right. Sounds cool.
thanks.
Okay, are there any more questions for Sera?
So I know the study in this context is independent shocks, but right now it seems for restaurant is very correlated, like the whole region is shut down. So it's not you transfer to another restaurant, you have to go do something else perhaps. So what is your intuition about market efficiency in the context of the current highly correlated shocks?
Oh, I mean, for sure, the workers is going to suffer a lot more, right? So I think the workers are even more willing to do more with less. So you would see an even larger welfare effect. So one thing that we control for in the experiment was we control for the labor demand by looking at how many firms are in the market at any given time. And so with correlated shocks, like the changes between the number of firms that are in the labor market would be really big. I think the COVID case, like in some places still resemble this, where you have individual restaurants that are shut down because of cases. And then you have like, you know, and then you have also areas that are entirely shut down by regulation. So I think both cases of correlated and uncorrelated shocks like speaks to a different aspect of like what has in this public health crisis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Sera, for the talk. This was super interesting, and thanks a lot for joining us. It's almost time, so yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing this.